Circle in the 16-month uprising that has resulted in the deaths of more than 15,000. Again, the headline at this hour is Syrian violence spinning out of control, and Defense Secretary Panetta calling for a peaceful transition. We'll have more on all of this coming up later in the day with the news conference available online at cspan.org, and more tomorrow morning on C-SPAN's Washington Journal. A look live at the U.S. House of Representatives, where members will take up a number of issues, including the ongoing debate about sequestration, with votes expected later in the day. Also on Capitol Hill, Ben Bernanke is testifying as he does 2 days of testimony. The Senate yesterday, the House today, talking about the economy and the so-called fiscal cliff. Live coverage of the Senate on C-SPAN 2 and live coverage of Ben Bernanke on C-SPAN 3 coming up in this hour. Thanks for being with us on this Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your day.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., July 18, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Gene Schmidt to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 17, 2012, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
There is a sad, unnecessary battle shaping up again over the future of public broadcasting. It's not an exaggeration to say that this battle is about the very future, its very existence of public broadcasting. You might have thought that we were past this when 15 months ago the Republican House leadership targeted NPR and tried to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Luckily last year, the 170 million people who don't just listen and watch to public broadcasting but depend upon it unleashed an unprecedented show of support. And as a result, the Republican leadership walked back. They cut but did not kill federal support for public broadcasting, despite the rhetoric. And there was actually a constructive sign in last year's appropriations bill that requested a study to examine alternatives to funding public broadcasting to federal funding, so that people would have hard facts to operate on this year. Ironically, that study, requested by our Republican colleagues and now being circulated, clearly shows that there is no viable alternative to federal funding for public broadcasting, and that many of the proposals that have been suggested would actually end up with less overall revenues in the long term. The House Appropriations Bill being marked up this morning would slash funding now, defund NPR support, and end public broadcasting as we know it within 2 years. At the same time, we have a Republican presidential nominee who singled out public broadcasting as one of the 5 programs that he would eliminate. It's because Governor Romney and the Republicans listen to a tiny fraction of the American public that is even a minority in their own party. A recent poll showed that 2/3 of the Republicans surveyed would either keep federal funding as it is or increase it. What resonates with Republican primary voters is not what America wants, needs, or believes. The unprecedented threat comes at exactly the time America needs public broadcasting most. NPR News, the object of greatest scorn, is the most trusted brand in the American news media. Listeners learn something, unlike Fox News viewers, where surveys show actually know less about the facts than people who listen to no news at all. NPR News has rated, has been the highest rated for the 9th year in a row. PBS shows like Sesame Street have helped 3 generations of parents raise their children with effective, commercial-free educational programming. Locally owned news is becoming only a memory for most of America as larger corporations buy up radio and television stations and local newspapers. There's no money to be made by commercial stations that cater to the special needs of rural and small-town America. But public broadcasting is there because their mission is to serve, not make money. Often these locally owned, managed public broadcasting stations are the only source that is direct news, education, and entertainment locally managed for local needs. We must stop this attack on this critical service for rural and small-town America. It's time for the 170 million Americans who depend on public broadcasting every month to speak out again and for Congress to finally listen. The radical proposal to slash public broadcasting funding, defund NPR, and terminate public broadcasting as we know it is the most powerful symbol of how out of step the Republican leadership is from the country they're supposed to represent. There's no reason to make public broadcasting a partisan issue. The American public has broad support, Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike, especially when PBS and its member stations were named #1 in public trust and a, quote, excellent use of taxpayer dollars for the 9th consecutive year. Since I've been in Congress, we've beaten back this destructive effort, but our challenge now has never been more urgent. It's time for people who believe in public broadcasting to stand up to what can only be termed extremism and settle this question once and for all about the future of public broadcasting. For unless we fight it now, there may be nothing left to protect.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the cover of this week's Economist magazine covers it very well. Rebuilding America's economy is its point. We all want to do everything we can to create good American jobs. Well, unfortunately, we're on the verge of losing a potential market of 140 million consumers. And the reason I say that is that just last week and today, a debate is taking place in the Duma, the Russian parliament, and the Duma is the lower house and the Federation Council is the upper house. And the Duma has passed it, and the Federation Council today is debating. They may have already voted on it. They are going to be joining the World Trade Organization. And this Economist publication talks about the fact that the way we rebuild our market is through expanded exports. Well, we know that forcing Russia to live with a rules-based trading system is something that could inure to the benefit of U.S. workers. And that's what accession to the WTO is. Guess what? Russia is going to be a member of the World Trade Organization within 30 days. The question is whether or not the United States of America will be able to have access to that market. We all know that Putin engages in crony capitalism. They have a massive bureaucracy and a corrupt court system. Forcing them to live with a rules-based trading system is the right thing for us to do. Now, I'm happy to say that there has been an effort led by my colleagues, Mr. Long and Mr. Reed, within the freshman class that has brought 73 Republican members to send a letter to the President of the United States urging support of permanent normal trade relations with Russia and urging this institution to support that. I'm happy it's a bipartisan effort. My friend Mr. Meeks has joined in this effort as well. And I'd like to, at this point, yield to my good friend from Missouri, Mr. Long, and thank him for the effort that he has made to tackle this important issue. I'm happy to yield to my friend.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, we agree that we need to get our nation's economy growing again in order to create jobs for American families. Increasing our nation's exports is one area that would help grow the economy and create jobs without costing one thin dime. I support free trade because more exports equal more jobs. I recently led an effort, as Mr. Dreyer mentioned there, to rally my freshman class to support the permanent normal trade relations with Russia. After nearly 2 decades of negotiations, Russia is poised to join the World Trade Organization this summer, and without repealing a Cold War-era trade restriction, American businesses will be at a severe disadvantage to international competitors. While the U.S. already trades with Russia, the repeal of the Jackson-Vanik provision would level the playing field for the U.S. exports after Russia joins the WTO. The media and some in this country like to portray my freshman class as a group that's not willing to work for the benefit of the American people or work in a bipartisan spirit. We can put those portrayals to rest. The President has shown an interest in increasing American exports, and the purpose of my letter was to show the President that 73 members of the Republican freshman class are willing to work on this issue to help support American jobs. I will continue to support efforts that will boost trade opportunities for American manufacturers and businesses. This is about doing what is right for our country and supporting efforts to create jobs for American families. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, let me thank my friend for his very thoughtful contribution and, in fact, disabusing people of this notion that somehow this group of 87 new Republicans who've come to Congress are not willing to tackle important issues. They led the effort to bring about passage of the Panama, Colombia, and Korea free trade agreements, and once again, they're providing tremendous leadership on our goal of creating good American jobs by prying open that market and ensuring that the United States worker will have access to it. And if you think about not only creating jobs here, but dealing with the problems of crony capitalism, dealing with the problems of a massive bureaucracy, and dealing with a corrupt court system, which is what exists under Vladimir Putin today, this is the right thing for us to do. We should not lose access to the market. I also want to note that my very good friend, Mr. Herger, who's been a great leader on the issue of trade, is here. Mr. Berg is here as well, who's been very involved in this. And I'd be happy to yield, if I might, to my friend from New York, Mr. Reed, who's played such an important role in the trade issue.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I rise today in strong support to join my friend from California. As he knows, we've been supportive of free trade from the moment we got here. And I was so pleased to see Colombia, Panama, and South Korea be passed. And now, gentleman's time is
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This month, as American families and businesses anxiously await Congress's action on the expiration of any number of tax cuts, I thought it would be a good idea to ask ourselves again that question: what would Ronald Reagan do? Let's query the Gipper. After all, for the past 3 years, all we've heard from Republicans is the claim that President Obama taxes too much. And when the Tea Party started its lobbying efforts in 2009, their name actually, T, was an acronym standing for taxed enough already. So just like the Republican Party, the Tea Party expressed an apoplectic furor about what they thought was happening in taxes. But while blind conjecture and pithy slogans are useful in getting attention, they ultimately fail unless they're backed by facts. Thankfully, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office recently came out with this comparison of the average federal tax rates paid by American families over the past 31 years. I'm sure Republicans in the Tea Party were all as surprised as many of us to learn that since 1979, Americans paid the lowest average federal rate in 2009 under President Obama. That's right. Thanks in large part to the Recovery Act's $243 billion in middle-class tax cuts, which my friends on the other side of the aisle opposed to a person, the average federal tax rate fell to a 31-year low. The average federal rate since 1979 is 21%, meaning that on average over the past 31 years, Americans paid 21% of their yearly income to the federal government each April. The previous low for the past 31 years was 18%. But in 2009, President Obama's first year in office, the average federal tax rate actually fell to 17.4%, the lowest since 1979 when Jimmy Carter was in the White House. That means a lower percentage of taxes paid than under Bill Clinton, lower taxes than under both of the two George Bushes, and yes, a lower average federal tax rate than under the Gipper Ronald Reagan. Throughout President Reagan's 8 years in office, the average federal tax rate was 20.9%, never dropping below 20.2%. In contrast, in his first year, the average rate under President Obama was 17.4%. In other words, after taking account of all the tax breaks and tax loopholes, especially the Recovery Act's Making Work Pay tax cut, Americans in 2009 paid 2.8% less of their income to the federal government than they paid during Ronald Reagan's best year. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Bill Clinton, the other George Bush, and President Obama. By far, President Obama has the lowest tax rates. Perhaps if the average federal tax rate under President Obama was as high as those during President Clinton's second term, then maybe Republicans would have a better argument. Of course, President Clinton's second term also saw significant job growth, an expanding economy, and the only federal budget surpluses since 1969, 4 in a row. But to complain about federal deficits and then immediately call for cutting taxes on the highest income brackets, even lower than the current 31-year low under President Obama, shows significant hypocrisy or a lack of basic addition and subtraction skills. So as today's Republicans try to spin a tax fairy tale where the lowest average federal tax rate in 31 years under President Obama is somehow too high, while ignoring the higher rates through the 80s and 90s, perhaps it's time once again to ask, what would Ronald Reagan have done? Republicans, even those who profess to idolize President Reagan, of course won't ask because they don't want to hear the answer. Following the significant initial tax cuts in 1981, President Reagan subsequently signed into law a host of taxes to try to bring the budget back into balance. 5 times he raised taxes in his 8 years. Madam Speaker, as Congress debates the extension of the current tax burden, comprehensive tax reform, and overall budget deficits, I again feel compelled to ask my colleagues, what would Ronald Reagan do? I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Recently, I heard from Jacqueline, a small business owner in southeast Texas, and here's what she said. Business owners who want to succeed put their heart and soul into their business. They are the ones who get there at the crack of dawn and leave after everyone else has long settled in for the night. I've been a small business owner, and I know a great many others like me, and nobody did anything for us. We did it ourselves, and the only thing the government did for us was to tax us. Apparently, the President disagrees with Jacqueline's statement. According to the administration, quote, if you got a business, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen. So the President is inferring, I suspect, that government should get the credit for the success of entrepreneurs. He is wrong, Madam Speaker. People are the reason for American success, not government. Americans have the vision, creativity, and audacity to pursue a dream, not the government. Americans risk their life savings, not knowing what profit they will get back in return for their labor. Government doesn't risk anything. Americans spend long days, sleepless nights, and working on weekends away from their family in order to keep their company afloat and pay their employees. Americans battle through discouragement and criticism in the hope for better days ahead. It is Americans who give up their home in order to pay for a store. And it's Americans who pay all those taxes and expensive government regulations that they're forced to pay. Government isn't there when a decision is made to get started, to take a leap of faith, make a hire, sell first goods, or tally bills. These people pursued their own American dream without government holding their hand. Those believers in big government say that Americans can only be successful if government controls their lives. Madam Speaker, government isn't the answer, government's the problem. America is not great because of government programs. It's great because of Americans, individuals with the spirit and desire to make their lives and this country better. Government doesn't assume the risk of business, individuals do. And starting a business is not easy. Business is driven by American ingenuity, creativity, and yes, hard work. Those who have been successful didn't wait around for someone else to help them with a government handout. The reality is that government actually makes it harder to do business now, not easier. When I ask Texas businesses what Washington can do for them, their answer is always the same: get out of the way. Businesses cannot afford to hire others and give them jobs because of the costly, unnecessary regulations imposed by government. According to the World Bank 2012 Doing Business report in the world, the U.S. now ranks 13th in the world in places to start a business. We trail countries like Belarus, Macedonia, and Rwanda. Now, isn't that lovely? America should not be a place where people wait for a government handout check. Instead, they should get a paycheck for working. Individual achievement used to be celebrated in this country, but the administration seems to punish success. And what does the government do when individuals are successful? The government punishes them with taxes. According to the collectivists, their wealth was created by government, and so it belongs to everybody. Sounds a lot like statism to me, Madam Speaker. The idea that citizens should be beholden to the government for everything, and government is worshipped as the savior of us all. That is not the American philosophy. So the policy is, under the status, tax them to death. Madam Speaker, you've heard that statement. If something moves, regulate it. If it keeps moving, tax it. And then if it stops moving, subsidize it. Government is doing all of the above to businesses in this country. And government is also overtaxing those small businesses, keeping 23 million Americans from finding jobs. Madam Speaker, small businesses create most of the jobs in this country. You see, when a small business is successful, it can expand by hiring people. Government doesn't create jobs, people and businesses do. So what next? Are the good days of American exceptionalism behind us? No. Americans are as exceptional as ever before, and it's the government that is our problem. Where I come from, we teach our kids that in this country, no matter who you are or where you came from, hard work and personal responsibility will pay off. In the America I know, people earn their paycheck and don't sit around waiting for a free government check. Small business owner Jacqueline is correct. Individuals, American ingenuity, and free enterprise create success, not Washington. That is the American dream, Madam Speaker, and when you see the President, tell him he's wrong. And that's just the way it is.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Russia, with some of the world's most sophisticated consumers and a rapidly growing market, will join the World Trade Organization by summer's end. After 18 years of negotiating with the United States and the World Trade Organization, after improving their trade laws and reducing tariffs, yes, very shortly, Russia will be a member of the World Trade Organization. For the United States, this could mean improved market access for our exports of goods and services. It could mean protections if Russia violates international rules. It could mean a trade boost and additional 50,000 jobs or more right here in the United States of America. And all of this, if the United States and this Congress lifts the Cold War relic, Jackson-Vanik Amendment, and authorizes permanent normal trade relations. We waived Jackson-Vanik for over 20 years. We now need PNTR, and we need to do it now. Our competitors will have access to that market. We will then fall behind them. We can compete with anybody in the world. This is the greatest country in the world. Let's not lock ourselves out of the market in Russia. Let not put ourselves behind our competitors. Here's an opportunity for us to come together. You heard earlier this morning my friend and colleague, David Dreyer, bringing folks together, talking about that we can do this together with the President of the United States, who has an export initiative to create more jobs. Here we can demonstrate to the American people that we're concerned about creating jobs and that we're going to make sure that we take advantage of that opportunity by bringing PNTR for Russia, immediately getting involved and trading with them to create jobs right here in the good old United States of America. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Mrs. Black, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it has been 41 months of unemployment above 8%, and the President is calling for higher taxes on small businesses. That is the devastating reality currently facing 13 million unemployed Americans. America is in the midst of a jobs crisis unlike anything this country has seen since the Great Depression. And the President's most recent answer to this crisis, a tax hike on small businesses to feed Democrats' insatiable appetite for more wasteful, ever-expanding government spending. This past week, the President followed up his recent call for higher taxes by scolding entrepreneurs, and I quote, "If you've got a business, you didn't build it. Somebody else built that," end quote. His disdain for American enterprise truly underscores that he not only doesn't know what it takes to start and run a business, but he is clueless about how jobs are created. If the President gets his way, instead of small businesses creating more paychecks for more workers, they will be paying more taxes to the federal government. I wonder if the President has considered the fact that small businesses create 2 out of every 3 new jobs in America. And that means for the majority of the nearly 13 million unemployed Americans, their best hope of being able to provide for their family hinges on small businesses' ability to hire more people. The fact that the administration's onslaught of new regulations and Obamacare's costly taxes and mandates have already placed a huge burden on our nation's small businesses, the President now wants to add insult to injury and siphon away $201 billion more from the American job creators. Now, a new study released yesterday from Ernst & Young confirms what many Americans already know. The President's latest tax hike plan would destroy 700,000 jobs and further weaken our struggling economy. The House is scheduled to vote in a couple of weeks on legislation to extend all of the current federal income tax rates, while at the same time laying a groundwork for making our tax code simpler and fairer by lowering rates and closing loopholes. Pro-growth tax reform is needed to help create the climate for job creation and to ensure more jobs stay right here in the United States. The most recent unemployment report shows that a number of people leaving the job market to go onto Social Security disability outnumbers the number of people who are going back to work. Let me repeat that. The most recent unemployment report shows that the number of people leaving the job market to go on Social Security disability outnumbers the number of people who are going back to work. So regardless of one's political ideology, it's truly unconscionable for the President or any member of Congress to be calling for tax hikes on Americans when millions are out of work and the economy is still treading water. But to make matters worse, this week many Democrat leaders in the Senate have said that they are willing to allow these taxes to increase for all Americans if they aren't able to get their way and raise taxes on 1.2 million small businesses. Now, every day, the President and the Senate Democrats continue with this political posturing and class warfare nonsense while the economy suffers and small businesses suffer and ultimately the American people suffer. The question is, will the President and the Senate Democrats who run Washington work with the House Republicans to stop this huge, job-killing tax increase from hitting small businesses and every American who pays an income tax? Or will they continue to insist on higher taxes to pay for wasteful government spending and bailouts for political allies? Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
This Sunday, the International Conference on AIDS is going to be held in our nation's capital. It's been some 30 years ago that this serious disease became known in our great country, and it spread from other parts of the world. Since that time, we've lost over 500,000 people, and yet we have not found a cure for this deadly disease. I've introduced legislation, H.R. 1462, with Senator Gillibrand, to see whether or not we can have more of national attention focused on the fact that we can do a lot more than we are doing. The major thrust, of course, of what we have to do is to educate people that this disease, although it used to have a great stigma, is recognized that there's so many different ways to come in contact with it, that education is one way that we can help people. Prevention, of course, is another. But I'd like to emphasize the need for testing. So many people are walking around with the virus and have no idea that they have it. And even though there has been efforts made by community organizations for free testings, this is one of the exciting things about the President's Affordable Care Act. There's no question, after we get finished with the political circus that we're forced to go through because of the coming election, that more and more Americans would understand the benefits that they are receiving even now from this universal coverage that so many people need, and a dramatic decrease in cost when people are able to get preventive care. Preventive care is one of the major parts of the President's Affordable Care Act. And what it means is that people can now go to doctors for regular checkups and find out things in time to prevent it from becoming more serious. When I was a kid, my mom had 3 kids, and someone told her that she was going to the doctor with us and we were not sick. Well, that was something that we didn't think was a luxury we could afford. But now, in seeing how important it is to contain serious illnesses and to reduce the cost of health care, it is so important that preventive care be a part of our national health system. And the quicker we get on with the implementation of this great bill, the more lives and the more dollars we would be able to save. And so remember, if you have any interest at all, take a look at what's going to be happening in September. And the Congressional Black Caucus, during our legislative weekend in September, will have professionals to come in to talk with us, to teach us, to tell us what we can do to extend this education process throughout our great country. I thank you for this opportunity, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise this morning to express my support for the Russian accession to the WTO and our need here in this chamber and in Washington, D.C. to grant Russia PNTR status so that we can establish a strong, forward-looking trade relationship with Russia. Madam Speaker, it's simple. American trade opportunity as represented by the Russian market equals American job opportunity here on our soil. I am proud to support this need to get PNRTR trade status recognition for Russia. And I'm joined this morning by a good friend from North Dakota, who I'd like to yield as much time as he may consume on the same issue. Mr. Berg.
I thank the gentleman for yielding the time, and Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to urge Congress to grant permanent normal trade relations with Russia, also known as PNTR. Russia will soon join the World Trade Organization. This will increase trade with Russia and create significant export opportunities. However, before we can take advantage of these trade benefits, we must grant permanent normal trade relations with Russia. This is a great opportunity for our state of North Dakota to increase trade with the 9th largest economy in the world. In 2011, last year, North Dakota had over $46 million worth of exports to Russia. This impacts 160 jobs in our state directly. That number will grow significantly if we grant PNTR to Russia. On the other hand, failing to grant PNTR will significantly impact North Dakota businesses as well as all American businesses. It will put us at a competitive disadvantage. This is why it's important for Congress to grant permanent normal trade relations with Russia and to do it as quickly as possible. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the remainder.
But I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I thank the folks that came to the chamber this morning, Madam Speaker, in a bipartisan fashion to recognize the need to grant PNTR status to Russia in order for us, American manufacturers, American job creators, to take advantage of that trade opportunity that is represented by their Russian accession to the WTO. Madam Speaker, if we go forward and grant PNTR status to Russia, our exports, United States exports, could double or perhaps even triple as a result of the trade opportunity that Russia represents to our American job creators. And in the great state of New York, that means tremendous numbers of jobs will be created. And as we all know, the #1 issue facing us in this chamber, in this city, is how are we going to grow jobs across America? And as I said in the beginning, and I'll say again, American trade opportunity such as represented by Russia equals American job opportunity. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this week the House is debating the Defense Appropriations Bill, which provides an excellent opportunity to point out something quite ironic about my colleagues in the majority. Because, Madam Speaker, for all of their talk about getting spending under control, that same rhetoric is surprisingly absent when we're talking about the Pentagon budget, which we're talking about this week. You see, they're eager to slash and burn when it comes to programs that invest and support middle-class working families. But somehow, when it's time for sacrifice to be shared, the military-industrial complex is nowhere to be found. While we have to fight for every penny of domestic spending, the Pentagon simply fills in its amount on a blank check, it appears. So I think we ought to have a dollar-for-dollar match in spending cuts. I will be offering a series of amendments to the DoD appropriations bill that call for defense cuts in the exact amounts that other important programs are being reduced. For example, the proposed labor HHS education spending bill eliminates the Title X program. Title X, the family planning program that historically has been passed with bipartisan support, has provided contraceptive and preventive health services to low-income women for more than 40 years. The Republicans want the Title X $294 million investment gone. So let's cut the defense budget by an identical $294 million. The Ag Appropriations Bill provides $119 million less than the President requested for WIC. That's the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, which provides badly needed nutrition assistance for poor pregnant women, new mothers, and children up to the age of 5. So if we're going to shortchange a pillar of our safety net by $119 million, then I believe the Department of Defense can do without that same $119 million. And here's the big ticket item, the Republican budget. The budget that passed this body in March and zeroed out all funding for the Social Services Block Grant, including $1.7 billion in cuts for next year. If my Republican friends believe that we can't afford $1.7 billion next year to provide daycare, housing, home health care, home meal delivery, and other social services, then I say we can also eliminate a corresponding $1.7 billion in defense spending. The fact is, Madam Speaker, defense cuts are not only fiscally responsible and morally defensible, they're widely popular. USA Today reported yesterday on a new survey that shows that 2/3 of those living in Republican congressional districts believe the defense budget is too large. It is no, excuse me, it is no secret. Military spending is widely out of control. And let's remember that none of this takes into account the war in Afghanistan, which isn't funded through the appropriations process. So on top of the bloated defense budget, American taxpayers are shelling out another $10 billion a month, not a year, a month, for a decade-long war that is failing to advance our national security objectives. It's time to reverse this course. It's time to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. It's time for the Pentagon to assume its share of the shared sacrifice. It's time to do the right and the sensible thing. Stop spending on weapons and warfare. Start investing in the American people. I yield back.
The lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Herger, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, coming from a small business background, I originally ran for public office not because of what government was doing for me, but rather because of what it was doing to me. Many small business owners in my Northern California district feel the same way, but apparently the President isn't getting that message. The other day he said, quote, "If you've got a business, you didn't build that business. Somebody else made that happen," close quote. Madam Speaker, perhaps that's why he's so determined to raise taxes on small businesses on January 1st. Now, Senate Democrats are saying that they can't, if they can't get their small business tax hike, they'll let taxes go up for everyone. That's just wrong. Let's stop the tax hike for all Americans. I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And that's it for the House for now. The House will come back today to vote on a bill that requires President Obama to provide specifics on what he would cut if sequestration goes into effect in January. Sequestration requiring across-the-board